Hi, welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course, and in this module we're going to be looking at the table sorter. Now the table sorter is actually a really interesting visual. Does several things for you. It actually has a lot going on with it. One thing it allows you to do is to easily see things like a histogram of your results over the column headers. So you'll actually see in the column headers, you see a yellow, blue, and red section up in the top of the image that I have on the screen here. There's actually a histogram up there that if you make it a little bit larger, you can see those values a little bit well. You can also take the values or the measures that you have and combine them into a stacked table column. So you can create a new column that combines multiple columns, and you can actually weight those values so that some of those values are distributed more than other values. And you'll see an example of how that works here as we get into our demonstration in a few moments. It's really interesting. And then finally, you should also know here that the table sorter also automatically ranks your values. So the values that you go to plug in here are the values that you get from your data set will automatically be ranked. Initially, they'll be ranked by a sorting of the categorical text, but then they'll be ranked by the different metrics that you plug into the table sorter after that. This visual is going to be developed by Microsoft, so let's go ahead though and take a look at where we can go download it, and then how we can use the table sorter visual in an example. Alright, so our first stop is to the Power BI Custom Visual Gallery. This is one place where you can download the table sorter. If you go to visuals.powerbi.com, this is one place. If you scroll down, you will find the table sorter. You'll see there's a ton of visuals here. But again, I've talked about this the last couple modules. Microsoft is in the process, I should say, of moving their visuals from the Power BI Custom Visual Gallery here to the Office Store. So if you go actually to store.office.com, like so, that will take you to the Microsoft Office Store, and you'll see Power BI has been included as part of the Office products here. And you can select Power BI and then go search for all or see more apps here in the bottom right, and you'll be able to find, after you go to the next page, you'll be able to find the table sorter right here. So you'll select the table sorter and go ahead and download it. You'll click add to download the table sorter. You can click it right here, and once you do, it'll actually you can select to download here, but you can also download a sample of how the table sorter works as well if you'd like. But once you've downloaded it, you're then going to bring this into the Power BI desktop. So I'm going to flip over to an empty instance of the Power BI desktop here. And what we're going to be doing in this example is we're going to be getting NFL data. So National Football League, NFL teams that are multiple, there are a total of 32 teams. You'll actually see 33 in our list because we're going to be looking across multiple years, and teams have moved. And so you might see things like the Los Angeles Rams as well as St. Louis Rams in the data set that we're looking at, which is going to add up to 33 different teams in our scenario here. So this is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to bring in the table sorter, the custom visual, after we get our data, and show you some of the interesting things that you can do to work with the table sorter, because it really does have some key things that set it apart from a lot of the other visuals you've probably worked with before. So first things first though, let's go get our data. To get started, we'll go to the Get Data section right here. We'll select Excel is where our data is coming from, and we're going to pull in this NFL data sheet or workbook right here. So I'll select NFL Data.xlsx and hit open. And once we bring that in, you'll see the spreadsheets that are available to us. There's really only one here because we're going to be looking at offense stats for NFL teams. So we'll select offense and then hit load. It's going to bring this data in, and by the way, this data has information all the way from the year 2000 through the 2016 season. So we have quite a bit of data here that we're working with that we're going to be able to use inside of the table sorter. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start by bringing in the table sorter visual, which right now you don't see. That's because we haven't added in the custom visual yet. So I need to expand this a little bit so that we can see those little 3 dots here to indicate that we can actually add in a custom visual. So I'll select that import from file option right here and select to import a custom visual. The visual that we're going to import in this case, you can find wherever you downloaded it from the screen that we looked at earlier. And we're going to be using the table sorter for this example. So I'll select table sorter and click open. Then once we've imported that, you can hit OK here. And then we'll actually go through and start to use this table sorter. So to use the table sorter first, you can go ahead and select it. Before I go ahead and pull this in though, what I'd like to do is actually create a basic little table of information so that we can actually see how the table sorter works and does cross-filtering with other visuals as well. So before we go ahead and bring this in, what I'd like to do first is we're going to go add in a basic little table here. So I'll say add a table. I'm going to put this up in the corner here. And in this table, we're going to see things like the teams. So I'll select team. And I want to see points per game. So I can see here the points per game, and I probably want to see an average of the points per game because we're looking at 16 seasons here. So let's do an average of the points per game. Okay. You can of course make this larger if you want to. If that's too difficult to read, you can go underneath general here and bump up the text size so it's a little bit easier to read. Maybe not quite that much, but that'll do. All right, so now that we've got some information in here about the teams just in a table, this is going to help us be able to see how the table sorter does cross-filtering when it comes to working with other visuals. And of course, you can do things like sort this. This is a table. Hopefully, you're kind of familiar with how tables work here. All right, now let's go ahead and select an empty area in our report. Select the table sorter to import it and use it as a visual. And I'm going to go ahead and resize this to take up the rest of the screen here. And then we'll start by bringing in a couple different fields. We'll start by bringing in the team field again. We'll also then bring in the yards per game, and we'll do an average of that after we bring it in. So we're going to see an average of yards per game. Oh, and it looks like I don't have the table sorter selected. Let's try that again. There, now I have it selected. We'll select teams. There we go. Yards per game right here, and we'll do an average of that, like I said, like so. And then we also want to see things in here like the points per game average, the total points, the turnovers, and things like that. So let's go ahead and also bring those in as well. So we'll bring in the points per game, which is right here. We'll also do an average of that. We'll bring in the total points, which this time I actually want to see a total points across all 16 seasons, so I'm going to leave that one alone. And then we'll bring in turnovers. I want to see turnovers all time as well. I'm not going to do any kind of average of that. So the table sorter is kind of interesting. You can see a couple of the things that we highlighted here earlier. You can see the histogram showing up top. You have things like a rank column that's always included. I didn't actually key in a rank column, but it brought it in. You'll note over here in the field well, you can actually bring in your own rank column if you wanted to. You'll also see a categorical field here being the teams. So categorical columns are shown here. You can very easily work with these if you wanted to. Say, for example, you wanted to move a column. You can grab one column, move it somewhere else. You can kind of shift the order, and it looks like you kind of dropped a column there. Let me add that back in here. That was our yards per game. But you can easily kind of move things around. You can shift them. I can drop this guy here, so you can shift them back and forth if you wanted to. And you can also do things like filtering on categorical data. So if I wanted to filter on a particular team, I can select the filter right here up above the teams. And I can tell it that I want to filter all the teams that contain the word maybe Rams. Remember I told you earlier that there's 2 Rams teams here, one for Los Angeles and one for St. Louis. So I can hit OK on this, and I can actually filter it down just to those 2 variations of teams. And if you followed too much of NFL football in the past, the Los Angeles Rams had a pretty terrible season here, so not too hot when it came to filtering and comparing them to the St. Louis Rams that were their predecessor. All right, if you want to remove a filter, you can, of course, come back up to the filter section here and tell it to reset that. Sends it right back to how it was. You can also do things like sorting on the metric columns that we have. So, for example, if I wanted to sort by the total points, I want to know which teams had the most points, because right now it's sorting by alphabetical. I can click on total points here, and you'll notice that it resorts and shows me who had the most points over the last 16 seasons. So the New England Patriots here had 7,409 points. Closest second person team had about 400 less points than them, so that's pretty intense. You can also sort by any of these other metrics. Maybe I want to see turnovers, so who had the highest turnovers. In the positive direction, the Patriots had 171 turnovers. That's more than twice as much in the positive direction here as anyone else compared to them, almost twice as much here. So it's interesting here. You can kind of see and analyze this and see here how these teams compare to other teams. You also have, like I said earlier, you have a histogram view at the top here of the values that you have as well. And then you can do some more interesting things. So say, for example, that you wanted to add in new columns. Maybe, for example, I deleted a column, like I removed turnovers. I hit the little X here to remove turnovers. You'll notice that turnover still stays in the field well over here. So I still see the TO column showing up underneath the value section here. That's because it's still part of the visual. It's just been removed temporarily. So you don't have to drag it in again. You can just come up here where it says add column and return that column back into the list if you wanted to. So it's very easy to add things back in. If you want to resort it, you can resort it as well. So kind of a nice interaction there. You'll also notice when you hover above certain values, like I'm doing now, it'll actually show you the values that are displayed for each of those represented values in the chart. You can also then select values here as well. So for example, if I selected Atlanta Falcons, you can notice that it filtered Atlanta Falcons in my table as well. So the cross-filtering here does apply very nicely inside the table sorter. There's also a way to do multi-selecting, but it's not turned on by default. I'll show you how to turn that on here in just a few moments. All right, next let's talk about how you can do things like unfiltering. If you want to unfilter this, so I don't want to have anything selected anymore, you can come up to the top here where it says clear selection. All right, so now we're ready to talk about stacked columns. Stacked columns are kind of a neat way to be able to combine multiple columns together and visualize them in a single location. So let me show you how this works. Let's say, for example, we wanted to add in a couple new columns. I want to add in third down attempts and fourth down attempts. And what I'd like to do is in these two new fields that I've added, I don't really want to show them like this. I can remove them here. I don't want to show them individually, but what I'd like to do is have a combined value or a combined column that stacks them. And that's what this option does right here. You'll see there's a add stacked column section that if you choose that, it actually allows you to create a new column that is based off of other columns that you have. So I can create this new stacked column. If I do something like select third down attempts and fourth down attempts, I can give this a name and I can call this something like third and fourth down, okay? And then you can also weight these values as well. So if you want one of the values, one of the measures here to be weighted more than the other, you can do something like come in here and say, well, I really want to weight third down to be a higher emphasis. So I can make this rated at 60% and maybe fourth down at 40%. And then when I hit OK, you can see here it creates a brand new stacked column for me that shows me the combined values together in a single stacked column. So I have this new column called third and fourth down that combines those two values. I don't even have them here separately. I just combine them into this one section. So it's kind of an interesting way to be able to view this. Of course, you can sort on this as well. If you wanted to, you can sort on these individual values. So if I want to sort based on fourth downs, Jacksonville Jaguars, that's my team, unfortunately, have a lot of fourth down conversions they've done over the last, really fourth down attempts they've done over the last 16 years. They have more fourth down attempts over the last 16 seasons than anyone else. I would imagine they're probably pretty bad on the turnover side of things here as well. Not as bad as I thought, but they're still not good. All right, so we've got a good view of how this works. Now let's talk through a few of the other things that are available in here as well. You can also do things like reweighting. So I talked about the stack column. If you want to, you can actually adjust the stack column by creating and clicking this little button in the top right of the stack column. And you can rename the stack column if you wanted to. You could remove it altogether, or you could reweight it. So if I select reweight, it brings me back to a point where I can reweight this as well. Okay. Outside of that, that's pretty much how the interaction works. It's all selectable. You can click on things, but let's actually shift over to show you some of the things you can do in the Format Paintbrush as well. Underneath the Format Paintbrush, if we go over to the Format Paintbrush, you'll see there's a few things that you can do here. If I go underneath the presentation section, I can do things like change the display units here. If I wanted to show the display units a little bit differently than the actual values, you can do that. You can also turn off or on the stacked nature here of my stacked column. So you can see when I turn that off, it actually separates out the values into more of a traditional view of the data. But in this case, I'm going to leave it as a stacked column. You can also then see you can apply and show the values for every entry in here. So if I turned on values, you'll see it actually kind of grays it out or makes it more transparent. And you can see the entries for every value that you have in here. I'm going to leave that off, but just want to show you what that looked like. You can also turn off the histograms that you see up top. If I turn this off on here, you'll see the histograms are no longer shown. Okay, I'm going to leave those on though. And then you can also turn off animations. Animations are turned on by default, but if I turn this off, you'll notice whenever I do things like resort the data, it just does it instantly as opposed to trying to animate that and make it look interactive. So if I turn that back on, notice the difference here. If I turn back on sorting, you'll notice it kind of does some animation there whenever it resorts the data for me. You'll also see here table tooltips, which is an interesting one. If you select table tooltips and hover above a value, that gives you a little tooltip that pops up and shows you the values that are inside the table. Okay, so that's a nice little feature. And then the last thing here I'll show you is underneath the selection. Underneath selection, you'll see there's a multi-select value. And if I turn on multi-select, this actually allows me to select multiple values here instead of just one. So if I wanted to, let's say I want to see the best teams as far as total points, I'll sort it by total points. And I'll select maybe the top couple teams here. So I'll select New England Patriots, Green Bay Packers, Indianapolis Colts, and you can see here I can multi-select. I'm not really having to hold shift or anything. I'm just selecting them, and as I select them, it automatically cross-filters multiple values into the other visuals on my screen. And then if I want to get rid of that selection, I can hit the clear filters or clear selection up in the top left, and it brings it back to how it was. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you want to have it multi-selectable or not, but you have to go underneath the format section here to determine whether or not it is multi-selectable. All right, I'm going to turn that off as well. Now, one last thing here before we move on, or before we end, is the way that you can actually filter some of these measures. And I'll tell you, before I do go too much further, I'm also going to turn off the tooltip because it's kind of popping up a little bit too much for me. There we go. But the last thing I want to show you is how you can filter these measures. And it's an interesting way to be able to do things like filter out outliers and just how to work with the data here itself. So the way I'd like to show you this is by selecting the filter of the average points per game, I believe is this one here. Let's make sure. Let's see. That is... yeah, average points per game. So if I want to do a filter on this, I can select the little filter icon right on the top of that column. And you can see this is a different type of filter that you might not be very familiar with. You have two ways that you can filter the data. On the top, you can filter based on a score. So it's kind of an algorithm that's been run, and it's scoring these based on whether how close they are to being an outlier or how close they are to the larger pack or the larger group of values. You can also, on the bottom, change this by just the raw value. So if you wanted to kind of manually filter out certain values, you can use this on the bottom or on the top to be able to filter out, let's say, for example, I want to filter out everyone that's had fewer than 20 points per game. So I could scroll this over to about 20 points per game, and once I get to that, let go, and you can see it's filtered out everyone that didn't make at least 20 points per game. You can hit the reset button here, that resets it back to where it was. You can also use this filter outliers and let it filter outliers on its own. So if I say filter outliers, hit OK, it's just showing me the outliers that exist in here. And in this case, New England Patriots and Los Angeles Rams are the high and the low outliers here. New England Patriots, by far, we saw earlier, they were averaging quite a bit more as far as points per game, and then Los Angeles Rams are quite a bit on the bottom end of the spectrum here. If you want to remove that filter, you can go back up to the filter above that column, uncheck or hit reset. I'm going to uncheck it, hit OK, and then it returns it back to where it was. So it's a really, really nice interactive visual that you have the ability to work with here. You can see, again, as you kind of scroll up and down the values, you can see where in the histogram up top those values are distributed. So it's showing distribution of values in that histogram. But this is really, really a nice interactive visual that you can work with. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and look forward to showing you our next custom visual in our next module.